You really think he can pay for that? The laughter came first, low, sharp, spreading across the diner like something contagious. Not loud enough to stop the room, but just enough to make everyone turn their heads. And look, Maya Carter didn't look up right away. She stood beside table 7, one hand steadying the edge of the chipped plate, the other holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, in front of her. The old man sat quietly, his coat worn thin at the elbows, fingers curled around nothing, as if he had already learned not to reach for things he could not keep. "Ma'am, I didn't order this," he said softly, his voice careful, like even speaking might cost him something. Maya set the plate down anyway. Eggs, toast, a small portion of bacon, nothing fancy, but warm, real hers to give. "I know," she replied, just as quietly. Not smiling, not explaining, just placing it there like it belonged. Across the room, a man in a pressed shirt leaned back in his chair, watching with a smirk that did not try to hide itself. "That's cute," he muttered, loud enough this time, "but charity doesn't pay rent." A few people chuckled. Others looked away. The kind of silence that wasn't neutral, just comfortable with what was happening. Maya's hand lingered on the edge of the table for a second longer than necessary. Not shaking, not hesitant, just still. The old man looked at the plate, then at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes, something deeper than gratitude, something quieter than pride. "I can't take what I can't return," he said, almost apologetically, as if dignity was the last thing he had left to bargain with. Maya reached into her apron pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and slid them beneath the receipt holder before he could say another word. "You already did," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but it didn't sound weak. It sounded certain. The laughter in the room shifted. Not gone. Just thinner now, edged with something else. Confusion, maybe, or discomfort that no one wanted to name. From behind the counter, the manager's voice cut through, sharp, controlled. "Maya." She didn't turn right away. "We don't do that here." The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Because everyone knew what they meant and who they were meant for. Maya finally looked up. Not at the customers, not at the eyes watching her, but toward the counter, where rules always came before people. "It's my money," she said, calm. Even no challenge in it, no apology either. Just truth. The manager stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not enough to hide it. "And when customers start feeling uncomfortable, it becomes my problem." A pause, then softer, colder. "Don't make it yours." Maya nodded once. Not in agreement, just in acknowledgement. The kind people give when they understand exactly where they stand, and decide anyway. She turned back to the table, adjusting the plate slightly, as if making sure it was within reach. The old man's hands hovered for a moment, then slowly, carefully, he picked up the fork. The diner returned to its rhythm. Conversations resumed. Plates clinked, coffee poured, but something had shifted. Small, almost invisible, like a crack no one wanted to notice. As Maya walked away, the man behind her shook his head, muttering, "You'll regret that kind of kindness." She didn't stop, didn't look back, because some people give expecting something in return, and some people give because they already know what it feels like to be left without anything at all. And in a room full of people who could afford to look away, she was the only one who didn't. By midnight, the diner had settled into the kind of exhaustion that made everything sound farther away than it was. The hiss from the grill, the soft scrape of chairs against tile, the steady drip from the coffee machine that never quite stopped. Maya Carter moved through it with the same quiet rhythm she always did. Refill, wipe, stack, smile when needed, disappear when possible. That was the trick with places like this. People noticed what you did for them, but rarely who you were while doing it. Her apron smelled faintly of syrup and dishwater. Her sneakers ached from 10 straight hours on the floor, and the tips in her pocket felt too light for the rent due Friday morning. Still, when she passed table 7 again, she slowed. The old man had eaten slowly, carefully, like each bite deserved respect. Not hunger, not desperation, but reverence. The plate was nearly clean now. Even the toast crumbs were gathered together at one edge, as if mess itself was something he did not want to leave behind. He sat straighter than before, though the coat still hung loose on his frame, the collar worn smooth with years. Under the harsh diner lights, his face looked older than it had from a distance. Not just tired, but weathered by a life that had once required decisions. There was something in the way he held the coffee cup, not like a man clinging to warmth, but like someone who had spent decades being served from better porcelain and had learned, somehow, not to flinch when life handed him paper instead. Maya reached for the plate. "You want me to warm that up?" she asked, nodding toward the coffee. He looked up at her then, truly looked, and for a moment the room around them seemed to dim, not because the lights changed, but because his attention had a strange way of clearing noise. "No, ma'am," he said softly. "It is enough." The words should have sounded ordinary, but they didn't. They landed with the weight of someone who had lived long enough to know how rare enough really was. Maya gave a small nod and gathered the plate, but before she could turn, he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out 3 coins, dull, mismatched, barely enough to matter. He placed them on the table with careful fingers. "For the trouble." She stared at them for a second, the metal catching the fluorescent light, small and stubborn, like the last defense of a man who would rather leave with less than leave owing. "You do not have to do that," she said. "I know." He slid the coins closer anyway. "That is why I do." Maya exhaled through her nose, almost a smile. Almost. She picked up the coins, then folded his napkin over them and tucked it back toward him. "Then keep your dignity," she said quietly. "I'm not in the business of taking that from people." Something shifted in his face then. Not surprise exactly, not gratitude either. Something older, more private. As if her words had reached a room inside him that most people had stopped knocking on years ago. Behind the counter, the manager was counting receipts with the kind of sharp, irritated movements that made paper sound guilty. A customer near the register glanced over, then looked away when Maya caught him. The whole diner had that after-midnight feeling now, where judgment lost its energy but not its presence. Still sat in the booths, just quieter. The old man rested one hand on the table, the other lightly around the cup. "What is your name?" he asked. Maya hesitated. Not because it was a hard question, but because some nights' names felt too personal for places that treated people like uniforms. "Maya." He repeated it once, low and steady, as if he meant to remember it, not just use it. "Maya Carter," she added after a beat, surprising even herself. He nodded slowly. "That is a name that sounds like it belongs to someone who has learned to stand without being held up." She blinked, just once. Most people told her she was nice, or quiet, or too soft for her own good. No one had ever said something like that. No one had ever looked at her like kindness was not weakness, but structure. "You say things like a man who used to be listened to," she said before she could stop herself. That brought the faintest curve to his mouth. Not a smile exactly, but the memory of one. "And you say things like a woman people should have listened to sooner." Maya lowered her eyes to the empty plate in her hand, suddenly aware of the grease stain on her apron, the crack in her thumbnail, the tiredness pressing behind her ribs. The truth was, she had spent most of her life being useful to people who never thought to be gentle back. Her mother used to say that survival made 2 kinds of people, those who hardened and those who refused to. Maya had never known which one was stronger. Maybe both bled, just differently. She tucked the plate under one arm. "You should stay inside a little longer," she said. "It is getting colder out." He looked past her, toward the front windows where the glass had gone black with night, reflecting the diner back into itself. The booths, the salt shakers, the tired lights, her moving through all of it like she belonged and did not belong at the same time. "The world notices more than you think," he said at last. So quietly she almost missed it. Then he rose from the booth with measured slowness, one hand brushing the table for balance, and slipped the coat tighter around his shoulders. Maya stood there a second longer than necessary, plate still in hand, the sentence settling somewhere deep. Because sometimes the cruelest thing about being overlooked is how long it teaches you to overlook your own worth. And sometimes The first person to remind you that you matter looks like someone the whole world has already thrown away. When the bell above the diner door gave its thin little ring, Maya looked up instinctively, but the old man was already halfway into the dark, his figure folding into the night beyond the glass as if the city had been waiting to swallow him back. For a moment she just stood there with the empty plate in her hand, watching the door settle shut, the cold from outside still lingering in the frame. Most people left behind noise. A chair pushed too hard, a muttered complaint, the smell of cologne or cigarettes. He left behind something stranger, a kind of stillness that made the room feel louder after he was gone. Earth to Maya. The manager's voice snapped across the counter, clipped and impatient. If you're done saving the world, table 4 still needs syrup. A couple of customers laughed under their breath. Not cruel this time, just careless. Maya blinked once, gathered herself, and moved. That was how nights like this worked. The moment could cut you deep, and 5 seconds later someone still wanted extra ketchup. She crossed the floor, refilled coffee, dropped checks, wiped down a booth where a toddler had smeared jam into the cracks of the tabletop like it was his job. But the sentence stayed with her. The world notices more than you think. It moved through her mind the way a song does when it catches somewhere you did not expect. Quiet, persistent, impossible to shake. By 1:30, the diner had thinned out. The neon open sign buzzed faintly in the front window, washing the glass in tired red and blue. Outside, the parking lot held puddles that reflected the streetlights in broken pieces. Maya stepped into the back hallway for her 10-minute break, leaning one shoulder against the cinderblock wall beside the soda crates. The vending machine hummed beside her, old, stubborn, louder than necessary. She opened her phone and stared at the home screen for a second before tapping into her banking app. The number there did not change just because she was tired of seeing it. Rent, overdue by $83. Power bill, due in 2 days. Her younger brother had texted earlier asking if she could help with his bus pass by Friday. Maya closed her eyes briefly, pressing the heel of her hand against her forehead. Some people talked about money like it was math. Add, subtract, plan ahead. But when you grew up one bad week away from the lights going out, money stopped being numbers. It became weather, something that could change your whole life overnight, whether you deserved it or not. You gave away dinner and still checking your balance? Her coworker Denise had come through the back door without Maya hearing her. She was older, sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had learned to be kind without ever becoming naive. Maya slipped the phone into her apron. Just making sure I'm still broke. Denise snorted softly, then leaned beside her, arms folded. That man. He wasn't what he looked like. Maya let out a small breath that could have been a laugh if she had more energy for it. Nobody is. Denise turned her head, studying her. No, I mean it. Did you see his hands? Maya frowned slightly. His hands. Clean nails, Denise said. Not perfect, but clean. And the way he sat, straight back, elbows in, like he had been taught by somebody expensive. She shook her head slowly. I've served enough men with money to know when one of them learned how to disappear. Maya looked back toward the kitchen door, where the warm light spilled in a dull yellow strip across the floor. She remembered the coat, the worn fabric, yes, but buttoned carefully. The coins, not offered like begging but like principle. The words, never too many, never wasted. Maybe, she said quietly. Denise gave her a look. Maybe nothing. Some people lose a lot before they lose themselves. That landed harder than Maya expected, because she knew something about that too. How easy it was for the world to confuse struggle with failure. How quickly people assumed that if your clothes were worn, your worth was too. She pushed away from the wall as the timer on her phone buzzed. Break over. Back to work. Back to smiling for tips and carrying plates and pretending. Her feet did not ache. But as she walked toward the swinging kitchen door, she glanced once through the narrow window at the empty parking lot, at the last damp shimmer where he had disappeared. And for the first time that night, she felt something she had not let herself feel in a long while. Not hope exactly. Hope was expensive when you lived paycheck to paycheck. It was something smaller, quieter, the uneasy sense that the night had not ended where it seemed to. Sometimes a life changes with a slam, a phone call, a diagnosis, a goodbye, and sometimes it changes with a man who leaves 3 coins on a table because he would rather go hungry than leave his dignity behind. The diner closed at 2, but closing never meant rest. It meant bleach in a bucket, chairs lifted upside down onto tables, the sour-sweet smell of old syrup wiped from counters that would be sticky again by morning. Maya Carter moved through it on tired legs, her rag circling the same laminate surface where the old man had sat, where the coffee ring still marked the table in a faint brown crescent before disappearing under her hand. She should have been thinking about the bus schedule, about whether she had enough gas to risk driving home instead, about the $83 still missing from rent. Instead, she kept seeing those 3 coins, small, stubborn, refusing pity. You know he is not coming back for you, right? Her manager did not look up when he said it. He was bent over the register, counting bills twice as if mistrust could make the numbers grow. Maya wrung out the rag. I did not ask him to. No, he said, sliding the drawer shut with a hard click. You just made a little performance out of feeding him in front of paying customers. The words were casual, which somehow made them meaner, like cruelty cost less when it wore everyday clothes. Maya set the rag down beside the napkin dispenser. It was 1 plate. It was not the plate. Now he looked at her. Not angry exactly, just annoyed in the way people get when someone lower than them forces a choice they would rather not make. It is the message. Folks come in here for pancakes and coffee, not guilt. They do not want to be reminded that misery is sitting 3 booths away. Maya held his gaze a second longer than usual. Misery does not disappear just because someone wants waffles. He exhaled once, sharp through his nose. You always do that. Do what? Say something true like it is supposed to help. That hit closer than she wanted it to. Because maybe he was right. Truth did not fix overdue rent. Truth did not make people kinder. Truth just made it harder to pretend. She reached for her coat from the staff hook by the back door, the fabric thin at the sleeves, 1 zipper tooth missing near the collar. Good night, Carl. Maya. She paused with her hand on the door. His voice softened, but not enough to become kindness. You cannot save every broken thing that wanders in here. She looked back then. Not defensive, not offended. Just tired in a way that came from carrying more than one person was built to hold. I know, she said quietly. That is why I only try when it is right in front of me. The cold outside met her all at once. Clean, sharp, honest. The parking lot glittered with damp patches under the streetlight, and the neon sign behind her turned the puddles red and blue like bruised little mirrors. She zipped her coat up as far as it would go and started walking toward her car. An old sedan with faded paint and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. Halfway there, she stopped. Something on the pavement near the curb caught the light. A single coin. One of his. She knew it before she bent down. Same dull silver edge. Same scuffed face. He must have dropped it when he stood, or maybe left it on purpose, though that did not feel like him. Maya turned it over in her palm, the metal cold against her skin. It was worth almost nothing, and somehow it felt too heavy to pocket. For a second she looked out toward the empty street, the bus stop at the far corner, the dark stretch of sidewalk where the city kept its forgotten people moving so no one had to look too long. There was no sign of him now, only the low hum of traffic somewhere beyond, and the wind tugging at the hem of her apron beneath her coat. She slipped the coin into the small inside pocket near her heart and stood there a moment longer than she should have, as if listening for something the night was not ready to say yet. Some people leave money, some leave trouble, and some leave behind a feeling so quiet you almost mistake it for nothing. But nothing does not stay with you on the drive home. Nothing does not make an empty street feel like the beginning of a story instead of the end of a shift. The next morning arrived the way hard mornings usually did. Too fast, too gray, and already asking for more than Maya Carter had to give. The ceiling in her apartment held that same thin crack over the stove. The radiator hissed like it resented being awake, and the coffee she poured into a chipped mug tasted more like heat than comfort. She stood by the sink in her socks, one hand around the mug, the other holding the folded rent notice she had already read 3 times, as if the amount might soften from repetition. It had not. $83 still missing, and the deadline did not care that she had worked a double or fed someone hungrier than herself. On the table near the window sat her apron from the night before, draped over the back of a chair, and beside it, the coin. She had emptied her pockets after getting home and set it there without thinking, but this morning it looked different somehow. Not shinier, not magical, just intentional. Small things get louder when your life is built on counting. Maya finished the coffee, rinsed the mug, and checked her phone. One missed call from her landlord at 7:12, one text from her younger brother, Eli, asking if she was still coming by on Sunday, and another from Carl, short and joyless. Short staff tonight. Do not be late. She slipped the phone into her coat pocket and reached for the coin before she could talk herself out of it, turning it once between her fingers before tucking it into the inside pocket again. She told herself it meant nothing. Just metal, just habit. But some part of her was not ready to leave it behind. The city outside had that washed-out look it got after a cold night, sidewalks still damp in the shadows, traffic lights blinking over streets full of people. Already late for something. Maya spent the day the way working people spend days when they do not have the luxury of falling apart. Laundromat first, then the discount grocery store where she stood in aisle 3 calculating whether bread or eggs could wait another week. Then a bus ride across town to drop off $20 at her brother's place even though she could not spare it. He tried not to take it, which was exactly why she pressed it into his hand. By the time she made it back to the diner for the evening shift, the sky had turned the color of old steel. Inside, the heat hit her cheeks, along with the familiar smells of grease, coffee, and fryer oil settling into fabric like memory. Denise was already there, tying her apron strings. "You look like Rent walked in and slapped you," she muttered. Maya gave a tired half-smile. Rent never needs directions. The first few hours passed in a blur of orders and noise. A church couple shared pancakes in polite silence. 2 high school boys stayed too long over bottomless fries. A woman at the counter cried quietly into her phone and kept saying she was fine in a voice that was clearly not. Maya moved through it all with practiced steadiness, but every time the bell over the door rang, her eyes lifted before she could stop them. Not because she expected him exactly, but because something in her had started listening for the possibility. He never came. By 10:30, disappointment had settled in so quietly she almost mistook it for fatigue. Maybe Denise was wrong. Maybe he had only been what he looked like. An old man, a cold night, a brief kindness that mattered because nothing followed it. Maybe that was all life was most of the time. A few decent moments with no witness and no reward. She was carrying a fresh pot of coffee toward the back booths when Carl stepped out from the register and blocked her path just enough to make the move deliberate. "You need to stop drifting," he said under his breath. "I have already got one customer complaining you seem distracted." Maya shifted the pot carefully in her hand. "I am working." "Then work where you are, not wherever your head's been since last night." His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to her. And there it was again, that irritation people reserved for kindness when it made them feel cheap. "You do not get extra points for caring after the check is paid." Maya held his gaze, then stepped around him without a word. Because some arguments are too small to win and too expensive to lose. Still, when she reached the coffee station, her hand brushed the inside pocket of her apron, feeling for the outline of the coin through the fabric. Cold, still there, still real. And that was when she understood what had been bothering her all day. It was not hope she was carrying. It was witness. For one brief hour in a tired diner, someone had seen her kindness as strength instead of foolishness. And once that happens, it becomes harder to go back to living like it meant nothing at all. Near the end of the second night, when the rush had thinned and the diner's noise had fallen into that tired, mechanical hum that comes just before closing, Maya stepped outside through the back door with a trash bag in one hand and the cold pressing instantly against her cheeks. The alley behind the diner smelled like wet cardboard and fryer grease, and somewhere beyond the chain link fence a siren moved across the city without ever getting closer. She tied off the bag, dropped it into the dumpster, and stood there for a second longer than she needed to. Breathing. Sometimes exhaustion does not feel heavy. Sometimes it feels hollow, like your body has already spent everything it had and is now just running on instructions. She slipped a hand into her apron pocket and touched the coin again, the worn edge resting against her thumb like proof of something she still could not name. 3 days. And still no sign of him. Not in the diner, not at the bus stop down the block, not in the faces passing the windows every night with their collars up and their eyes down. The city had swallowed him the way cities swallow people every day. Fast, without apology, like disappearing was just another form of rent. Maya looked up at the narrow strip of sky between buildings. Dark, clouded, holding no answers. You cannot keep waiting for a stranger to make your life mean something, she said softly to herself, the words fogging in front of her mouth before the wind took them. It sounded harsh, but not cruel. More like a hand on her own shoulder. Because that was the danger in being seen, even briefly. You started wanting the world to confirm what one decent person already knew. She closed her eyes and leaned back against the brick wall, the rough surface pressing through her coat. Her mother used to say that some blessings do not arrive to change your circumstances. They arrive to keep your heart from turning into the thing that hurt you. Back then Maya had thought that sounded beautiful and useless. Now, standing in the cold behind a diner with overdue rent, aching feet, and a coin from a man she might never see again, it felt truer than she wanted. The back door opened behind her with a metallic thud. Denise stepped out, arms folded against the chill. She did not speak right away, just came to stand beside Maya, shoulder to shoulder, both of them facing the alley like it had something worth explaining. Still thinking about him, she said at last. Maya gave a small shrug. Maybe. Denise let out a quiet breath. Then let it be what it was. Maya stared ahead. What if that was the whole point? Then it was enough. The answer settled between them. Simple, solid, unadorned. Enough. The same word he had used over the cold coffee. And suddenly it did not sound like settling. It sounded like survival with dignity still intact. Maya straightened and pulled her shoulders back, not because her burdens had gotten lighter, but because carrying them with grace was still a kind of strength. She pushed away from the wall and reached for the door. Come on, Denise said, holding it open. Night is not over yet. Maya nodded once and stepped back inside, the heat wrapping around her again, the lights too bright, the smell of coffee too strong, the whole ordinary world unchanged. But something in her had quieted. Not hope, not expectation, just the steady understanding that kindness does not become foolish because nobody applauds it. Sometimes the only witness you get is your own conscience. And sometimes that has to be enough until the world catches up. The third day began like the two before it. Ordinary in all the ways that make a person stop expecting anything extraordinary. Maya Carter tied her apron in the narrow employee hallway, tucked loose curls behind one ear, and stepped onto the diner floor just before the lunch crowd began rolling in. Outside, the sky hung pale and overcast, the kind of colorless afternoon that made the chrome trim on parked cars look dull and tired. Inside, coffee steamed, forks tapped ceramic, and someone at booth 3 was already complaining that the hash browns were not crispy enough. Maya moved through it with the same quiet precision she always did. Pen in hand, shoulders relaxed, smile small but real when it needed to be. If anyone had asked, she would have said the night in the alley had done its job. Settled her. Enough was enough. She had said it to herself twice on the bus ride in. Once while refilling ketchup bottles. Once more while folding extra napkins behind the counter. But peace is fragile when it is built on discipline instead of certainty. And sometimes the world waits until you finally stop looking before it arrives all at once. It started with a sound no one in that neighborhood was used to hearing. Not one engine, but many. Low, smooth, synchronized, the kind of expensive silence that somehow still announced power before it ever entered a room. Denise was the first to glance toward the window. What in the world? She murmured. Then the reflections appeared across the front glass. Black paint, polished enough to hold the sky. Long hoods sliding into view one after another until the entire row of curbside parking in front of the diner seemed to darken. Maya looked up from pouring coffee at table 6, And for one suspended second, the whole room lost its rhythm. A spoon paused halfway to a mouth. A child stopped kicking the vinyl booth. Even Carl, who prided himself on being unimpressed by anything that did not increase sales, stepped out from behind the register and squinted through the window like maybe his eyes were lying to him. 5 black sedans, maybe 6, lined the street in a gleaming procession that did not belong anywhere near chipped mugs and laminated menus. The diner's neon sign reflected across the windshields in trembling red letters. Cheap light touching expensive metal like the two worlds did not know what to do with each other. Then the first rear door opened. A man in a dark suit stepped out. Tall, earpiece visible, posture straight as a gate. Another followed from the second car. Then a woman in a charcoal coat with a leather folder held close against her side. No one spoke at first, because money has a way of silencing people even before it explains itself. Carl found his voice before anyone else. "Maya," he said, though he did not seem to know why he was saying her name. The bell above the diner door rang once. Then again as the door opened wide and cold air swept inside. The first suited man stepped in, scanning the room with quick, disciplined eyes, not threatening, just precise. Behind him came the woman with the folder, composed, elegant, the kind of person who made cheap spaces feel temporary just by entering them. Conversations died completely now. Maya was still standing beside table 6, the coffee pot warm in her hand, her pulse suddenly loud enough to feel in her throat. The woman looked across the room, once, twice, then stopped. Her gaze landed directly on Maya. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear, polished, carrying easily through the stunned quiet. "Are you Maya Carter?" Every eye in the diner turned toward her at once. Maya did not answer immediately. Not because she was afraid, but because life had trained her to distrust any moment that felt too much like a door opening. Her fingers tightened slightly around the coffee pot handle. "Yes," she said at last. The woman gave the smallest nod, as if confirming something important. "Then we have been looking for you." And just like that, the room changed. Not in sound, there was still almost none, but in weight. The same people who had watched her feed an old man in silence were looking at her now as if silence itself had returned wearing a suit. Maya could feel the heat of every stare in the diner before she moved a single inch. Not warm, not human. Just a tension, sudden and heavy, the kind that people reserve for accidents, miracles, and public shame. She set the coffee pot down carefully on the nearest table, because her hands had learned long ago that steadiness mattered most when the world wanted to see you flinch. The woman in the charcoal coat stepped closer, her heels quiet against the tile, her expression professional but not cold. "My name is Evelyn Price," she said, then opened the leather folder with practiced precision. "I serve as chief counsel to Mr. Henry Caldwell." The name did not land on Maya right away. It passed through the room first, brushing over faces that were already shifting from curiosity to recognition. Carl blinked twice. One of the men at the counter actually let out a low whistle before catching himself. Denise's mouth parted just slightly, not because she knew all the details, but because she knew enough to understand that names like that did not walk into places like this unless something important had broken through the wall between worlds. Maya stared at Evelyn, trying to fit the polished words to the quiet old man who had sat at table 7 with cold coffee and 3 worn coins. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, and her voice sounded calm, but only because disbelief sometimes wears the same face as composure. Evelyn's expression softened by a fraction. "3 nights ago, Mr. Caldwell came here alone, without staff, without security, without any public identification. He has a habit, on rare occasions, of moving through the city without protection, to see who people are when there is nothing to gain from being kind." The room went so still that Maya could hear the hiss of the grill in the kitchen and the faint tapping of rain beginning again against the front window. "That was him?" Carl asked before he could stop himself. Evelyn turned toward him just enough to answer without really acknowledging him. "Yes." Then back to Maya. "And according to Mr. Caldwell, you were the only person in this building who treated him like a human being." The sentence did not explode. It sank. Slowly, deeply, into every booth, every cup, Every face that had laughed, looked away, or muttered something cheap because cruelty costs less when shared. Maya's throat tightened, not with triumph, not even with shock anymore, but with something harder to name. Because it was one thing to imagine that someone important had noticed her kindness, and another to hear out loud that everyone else's indifference had been noticed too. Evelyn reached into the folder and withdrew a small envelope, cream-colored, thick, sealed with a dark embossed crest that looked expensive even from a distance. Mr. Caldwell asked that I place this in your hands personally, she said. Maya did not take it at first. Why? The question came out smaller than she intended. Not fearful, just honest. Evelyn held her gaze. Because he said dignity should never go unanswered. That nearly undid her. Not the cars outside. Not the suits. Not the silence in the room. That, because she had not fed him hoping the world would repay her. And now the world, or some strange corner of it, was standing in front of her insisting it had been watching after all. She accepted the envelope with careful fingers. The paper was cool, smooth, unreal against the roughness of her skin. Carl shifted near the register, suddenly aware of himself in ways men like him rarely are. Maya, I did not know. He started, but the sentence died where it deserved to. She did not look at him. She was still staring at the envelope, at the crest, at the impossible proof that a man the whole diner had reduced to inconvenience had walked in carrying a name that could move streets. Evelyn inclined her head slightly. Mr. Caldwell is waiting outside. If you are willing. Maya lifted her eyes then, finally looking through the front windows, past the black sedans, past the reflections, to the rear door of the longest car where a figure now stood beneath an umbrella held by someone else. Older, straighter, dressed in a dark coat cut sharp enough to belong in boardrooms instead of bus shelters, but unmistakable all the same. The same eyes, the same stillness, the same man. And in that moment Maya understood something she had not known 3 nights ago. Power does not always reveal character. Sometimes it only reveals who already had one when no reward was coming. Maya stepped outside with the envelope still in her hand. The diner door closing behind her on a room that no longer knew how to look at her. The rain had settled into a fine, steady mist, soft enough not to soak, just enough to leave a silver sheen across the black cars and the cracked sidewalk beneath them. Henry Caldwell stood beside the open rear door, one hand resting lightly on the roof of the sedan, the umbrella above him held by a driver who knew better than to interrupt the silence between 2 people who had met once without status. And now, again with all of it restored. Up close, the difference was almost disorienting. The coat was tailored, the shoes polished, the silver at his temples neatly kept, but nothing in his face had changed where it mattered. The same measured eyes, the same stillness, the same strange dignity that had somehow looked more at home in a diner booth than most people ever did in power. Maya stopped a few feet away. For a moment neither of them spoke. The city moved around them in quiet layers, tires hissing down the wet street, a bus sighing at the corner, the neon from the diner trembling across the puddles in red and blue. Henry looked at the envelope in her hand, then back at her. I did not come to reward you, he said at last, his voice low and steady, exactly as she remembered. I came because gratitude should not hide when cruelty was public. Maya felt that land in the deepest part of her, because he had seen all of it, not just the plate, not just the coffee, but the laughter, the shrinking, the way kindness is always made to defend itself in rooms where indifference never has to. She glanced down at the envelope, then met his eyes again. I did not help you because I thought you were somebody. The faintest line of warmth touched his face. That, he said, is precisely why I know who you are. The rain gathered briefly at the edge of his umbrella and slipped down in a thin line. Maya reached into the pocket inside her apron and pulled out the coin she had kept with her for 3 days. It rested in her palm, dull and worn, almost nothing to look at. Henry saw it, and something quiet passed through his expression. Not surprise, not embarrassment, recognition. She stepped forward and placed it gently into his hand. You left this. His fingers closed around it slowly. No, he said after a beat. I think I left it where it needed to stay. Maya almost smiled then. Not because life had suddenly become easier, not because one powerful man's gratitude could erase overdue bills or years of being overlooked, but because something in her had been returned intact. Not rescued, recognized. Behind her, through the diner window, she could feel the weight of eyes still watching. Carl near the register, Denise by the coffee station, customers frozen in the middle of their ordinary hunger. But Maya did not turn around. She stood there in the rain, her shoulders relaxed, her face calm, while Henry slipped the coin back into her hand and closed her fingers over it with a care that felt older than courtesy. Then he stepped back toward the car. Not above her, not beyond her. Just changed in the way all truth changes people once it is seen clearly. Maya remained on the sidewalk as the door shut, as engines murmured back to life, as the motorcade pulled away one dark car at a time. And when the street finally emptied, she was still standing there, the coin warm now in her palm, the rain cooling her face, the whole city looking exactly the same, except for the part of it that had finally learned how to look at her.